Howdy peeps, and welcome back to the channel for what is looking like a kit review, but yeah, it's not really. This is more of a how I do kind of video, and in which obviously we'll be looking at the figure, the Red Riding Hood by Nuts Planet, but I'll be showing how I deal with resin, as it's a resin figure. And some kinds of resin, let's start again there. Resin can be potentially harmful. There are different types or different formulations, and from what I understand and the little I know about the subject, some from let's put it not less health and safety centric countries can be the nastier, more carcinogenic, more toxic variety than, say, from an EU or US or something like that, with more laws about these things. So it always pays to be better, better to be safe than sorry. So you don't necessarily want to be breathing it in if you can help it. So what I would normally do, and I won't do for the purposes of this video because it would just white everything out, is I would get some kitchen roll, just your normal, a couple of sheets of that on the cutting mat, dampen down with water so that the dust sticks to it, so it's not becoming airborne and you're breathing it all in, which is where the problems probably occur. Also, I would normally wear, it doesn't have to be a full-on respirator, just a dust mask to filter out any bits that do get in the air. Again, I won't today because otherwise you'll just hear which I'll probably sound like to most of you anyway, but some of you might actually understand or listen. So we'll pop her out of the box. And is the usual case with resin figures, you get a lot of packaging to keep them safe, and we can see what we mean by dealing with resin in a moment. So the first thing we do is we check all the bits are present and undamaged. That's all the bits. We'll pop the box, try and find a gap that's not full of model kits at the moment. There we go. Normally you get the main parts packed loose, the smaller parts in a little Ziploc bag. Now I believe this is probably instructions, not that you really need any. It might just be a piece of card, you never know. Or an advert. Yep, it is just a piece of card. So quite why that was in a sealed bag I have no idea, but we'll keep it anyway. So we have the main body, the cloak, the base, the arms, the other leg and the swords, etc. We'll leave those for now, shall we? Yes, we'll leave the smaller parts for now and we'll start with the larger bits and how to deal with. Now, assuming we got the piece of damp down kitchen paper or blue roll or whatever it is you use to wipe your messes up in the cave, assuming that's down, we'll start work. First thing we do, much like with plastic parts, need to remove what we'd call a sprue gate, just the pouring or the remains of the pour stubs from where it's been poured into the mould. Oh, that's got some serious texture on it. And there are obviously several ways of doing that. We can clip them off with a pair of clippers. Don't use your best new ones. Use a pair that have seen better days. We can use razor saws. I've got the big Hobbycraft one and also the little Tamiya Photo Etch one. That blade has seen better days, but it still works. It'll also cut with a hobby knife, and clean up once we've got the worst off with the saw. Just your normal sanders or files, and there we go. So let's start with a nice easy one, shall we? Let's get the paw stub off of the foot. Now we need to be careful here because we do have a mount where she mounts into the base. We want to leave that behind if we can. And just now resin can be quite fragile and delicate. It's not quite as delicate as some would have us believe, and it's easy to glue back together if it does snap. And all we need for that is super glue, as your normal textile or whichever type of plastic glue you use won't necessarily work with resin. Well, it won't work with resin. So it needs to be an actual glue rather than a cement. So we've sanded or sawn that mount block off. Let's give it a quick clean up along the edges just to make sure there's no excess fluffy bits. And yes, this sander has pretty much had it. And we'll check to see if she fits in the base. Yep, she does. She's a bit wibbly wobbly, but she's only got one leg at the moment. That's to be expected. So that's one way of getting the excess bits off. The other thing you need to check around is to check for seam lines, as you normally would with plastic parts. Any flash, although resin will cast very thin, so what you might think is flash might not be. For example, this belt that runs around her hip is extremely thin. I mean, I can see through it, but it's not flash, it is actually part of the figure. Another thing to bear in mind is how the thing's going to go together. Now in this case she's got a big cape on, which I can't get in because of the paw stubs on the cape, but if we put the cape on now we're not going to be able to paint half the cape or the back of the body and the bare bum. Now we're not necessarily going to be painting the back of the body in full detail as we would the front. It will just get a basic paint job so it's covered, but we can actually use it to practice. If we're not sure skin tones or washes we're going to use, we can practice on the back because it won't be visible. Now the base being a larger paw block, we're going to need to be a little more careful with this one. And as everyone always says, never cut towards yourself. Just to be contrary, I always seem to cut towards myself. And I think this is one of those cases where I might be better off snipping the excess and then sanding rather than sawing. But we're in the process now, so we might as well carry on. Yes, the saw is getting stuck in the resin. This saw has probably seen better days. It's sawn a lot of things. It's done resins, plastics, woods, you name it. I think I've pretty much sawed through everything with this thing. And I've had it 3 years, so it's probably fairly blunt by now as well. You can hear how much sharper those teeth are at that end. Also pays to give teeth a quick clean out every now and then so they don't just clog solid. And we can see the amount of rust coming off the blade, which is never a good sign. Don't worry, that didn't just cut me where I sawed it into my finger. I've got fingertips like leather. It's we are slightly off centre, not too bad. Now I'll come back in from this side. And fortunately that's the back of the base, so a little bit of sanding to smooth that off, for which I will actually use a file, as the foil being completely flat we'll take off the high points and leave the low points until we get it relatively smooth. But yeah, there we go. And resin does sand and file very quickly, so that's something to watch out for. It's very easy to go too far. So that is basically how I deal with resin. I'd say gluing it together, I will just use bog standard super glue, obviously checking the parts fitment first and whether it's a good idea to actually glue the parts on before painting. So in this case, if we look at the leg, that's a nice joint, there's no gaps there. So we'll be able to glue that leg on. Try and work out which way around the arms go. Let's see, and I would have said if we're going to glue the leg on, then maybe leave the sword off, because getting in behind that to paint that could be rather tricky. Although it's not too much there. And the other arm's going to be fine because it will go at whatever angle we choose, I guess. Somewhere around there, so we can glue that one on. And then we have a little scabbard for the daggery bit, which just goes on her leg, and that will be painted separately as well. So just as you go in, think things through, especially with figures, not so much with aftermarket parts for a kit, but with any figure pretty much, as you're putting it together, think, how am I going to paint it, and will gluing these two parts together now cause me problems later? So yes, basic safety tips: piece of damp paper kitchen roll down to catch the dust, just a cheapy little dust filter mask so you don't breathe any of it in. Just simple razor saws or clippers, pretty much all the same tools you would use to clean up plastic parts, just with the saw instead, because some of the paw stubs can be quite large. There we go, there's one. These aren't particularly big on the cloak. That one's going to be a pig to cut though. If in doubt, just take your time. There's generally no rush to finish a model. See, there we go. That just needs a bit of clean up with the sander. Just in the same way as you would a sprue gate. There we are. Just as I say, sands or files away a lot quicker than styrene does. Try not to breathe that in. Ah, there we go. That's why the sword, the arm actually mounts into the cape rather than onto the torso. So if I show, we have a mounting block here and corresponding mating hole in the arm. So the arm actually sticks into the cloak. So yes, we'll definitely be painting all the bits separately apart from the leg. Anyway, so recap: damp paper thing, dust mask, your basic tools, and just super glue it to stick it together. And that is how I deal with resin parts. So thanks for watching. Maybe you picked something up, maybe you haven't. But if you like what you're seeing, like, thumbs up, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you don't, well, tough. You know, it's one of these things. I'm sure there'll be another channel out there better suited to what you want from your YouTube channels. But anyway, have fun, enjoy your modelling, peace out, rock on, and bye bye.